Andrea's mother suggested she look into the work of counselor and therapist Carol Bowman. Bowman has written 2 books, both supporting the proposition that sometimes the dead can be reborn.
We are taught from a very early age in this culture, in the Judeo-Christian culture, that reincarnation doesn't exist. Once you observe this in a child, and the evidence is very compelling, you have to open up to another explanation for what is going on.
Bruce was deeply skeptical.
He said there has to be a logical explanation.
I don't believe in past lives. I don't believe in this stuff.
Here it comes.
But with the violent nightmares recurring 3 and 4 times a week, the Leinegers felt they had to do something. So with guidance from Bowman, they cautiously began to encourage James to share his memories. They say the result was startling.
These memories tend to fade between the ages of 5 to 7.
His parents say between the ages of 2 and 4, James would reveal extraordinary details about the life of a former fighter pilot, mostly at bedtime, when he was drowsy.
Bruce said, what happened to your plane? He said, it crashed on fire. And Bruce said, why did your airplane crash? And he said, it got shot. And Bruce said, well, who shot your plane? And I'll never forget the look on his face. He went, oh, the Japanese.
Not only did James remember flying a Corsair, he demonstrated knowledge of the plane's peculiarities, like the time he was flipping through a book about planes when he was 4.
And he got to the Corsair and he said, that's a Corsair. And he goes, you know what? They used to get flat tires all the time.
In fact, historians and pilots agree that the plane's tires took a lot of punishment on landing. Of course, this is a fact that could easily be found in books or on TV. But then, James began to offer up the kinds of specific details his parents say are harder to explain away.
Another night, Bruce had come in and he said, do you remember where your plane took off? And he said it took off of a boat. Do you remember the name of your boat? Natoma. Do you remember what your name was? And he'd always say, James. His name is James. It never really occurred to us. We thought he just wasn't understanding the question. So I said, do you remember any friends or anyone else that you flew with? And he said, Jack Larson.
Bruce began doing some research. Almost immediately, he discovered that the Natoma was an actual ship, a small aircraft carrier in the Pacific called the Natoma Bay. And Jack Larson, the Navy buddy little James recalled? Well, it turns out there was a pilot named Jack Larson who served aboard the Natoma Bay. In fact, he's alive and well,
Leo Pyatt
living in
served on
Arkansas.
the ship. From his home in Ohio, he organizes the Natoma Bay reunions. That's how Bruce found him.
I wanted to disprove it.
He asked a few questions about, did I know some of the people? Oh yeah, I remember those people. And so he got very quiet.
It was all real. The people and places James described actually existed. And remember those G.I. Joe dolls that James named? Turns out 3 men with the same names, first and last, served on the Natoma and were killed in action. James said they greeted him in heaven after his crash.
When little James would describe being shot down, he told of how his plane had sustained a direct hit on the engine.
We had an airplane, and I said, well, can you show me where it was? And he pointed right up to the front of the engine.
That's what makes this man's story so intriguing. His name is Ralph Klarber. Klarber was a rear gunner on a TBM Avenger that flew off the Natoma Bay. On March 3rd, 1945, he took part in a raid near Iwo Jima. As it happens, Klarber's plane was right next to the one flown by James M. Houston, Jr. It was to be Hugh's last mission before leaving for home the following day. As Klarber recalls, the sky was thick with enemy flak.
We experienced pretty heavy anti-aircraft fire, but this was the most intense that I experienced at any time.
Suddenly, a flash near the nose of Houston's plane.
I saw the hit. I would say he was hit head-on, yeah, right on the middle of the engine.
March 3rd, 1945, during a mission near Iwo Jima, he took a direct hit. At age 21, was declared missing and presumed dead.